Formal introduction. Hi, my name is Manwai. It's easiest to just call me MW. I've been on this Agile journey for more than 15 years, working full-time in various companies in program management, which evolved into internal coach, and eventually became chief of staff when I started messing around outside of product development, that is finance, HR, facilities. Last year, I decided to bite the bullet and become an independent consultant after feeling like Groundhog Day inside all the companies. So my goals are simple. I go after anything or any group that hinders the team working effectively together to produce a product that delights the customers. You can find more information on my LinkedIn, which is on the slide. My email is also there if you want to contact me.
And I am JF. JF is short for John Francis. It's my first name. It's very Catholic. I've been working in the Valley for the past 30 years now. And my Agile journey started in 1998 when I was an engineer. And I decided to try things that I read about on net news and implemented what were the beginnings of Scrum with my team. The results surprised me very much. And I've been doing Agile ever since then, constantly growing, constantly learning, and helping people adapt to it.
All right, now that you know who we are, well, here's the talk. We are on slide 7, promotions and cultural considerations to increase agility. The reasons why we put this talk together is because we both have experienced the following scenarios.
For me personally, I started out as an engineer, as I said. And I was a very good engineer who actually got my teams to deliver consistently. And along the way, because of this, I was being pressured by my managers and their bosses to go into management. I didn't want to go into management. Because one, I was not having fun anymore when I was pressured to do something I didn't want to do.
Now for me, I have witnessed a number of great workers who got pressured into management by their parents or society expectations. Those were no fun either. We have actually both seen introverts being beaten up by the team or fired for being non-collaborative. But does it have to be the case? Well, we'll talk more on that later on. Of course, we cannot forget those who actually want to get promoted, but with Agile, there doesn't seem to be any chances since the criteria favors individual contribution.
So what do you want to get out of this talk?
Oh, well, no, actually, I think it's what do we want you to get out of this talk?
What do we want to get out of this talk? What do we want you to get out of this talk? There's 4 things. First is we want you to learn the thinking patterns and the questions to ask to start tackling some of these scenarios. Second is to understand that today's idea of growth and improvement in the Agile sense does not necessarily equate the traditional view of climbing the ladder, even though inspect and adapt is inherent in Agile.
And the third, we want you to recognize that even though Agile doesn't explicitly talk about corporate levels, the development and growth that are part of the Agile values should be included in the traditional constructs of levels. And finally, we want you to grasp how teams and HR can actually work together to redefine and remap these levels for promotions and rewards that then spells more of the Agile values and mindset. Now, we're going to have some more fun for you. We're going to have 2 polls for you. JF, you're going to explain what we're supposed to do?
Yes, I will. I will set up 2 polls and I will start sharing the polls with you. The first one is a poll where you can answer as many and check as many answers you want. I will launch the poll. You should be seeing it now on your screens, and you can start answering. It's basically a number of scenarios that we've seen that people have encountered, that we've encountered in our lives as Agile coaches and Agilists in the industry. So feel free to start answering and picking your answers. I'm starting to see people respond.
Is everyone seeing the?
I notice you do have to make a selection in order to submit.
Yes.
Yes.
Means you have to say yes to some of these in order to participate in the poll.
You can check multiple items, not all items.
Yeah, his
All
answer
you want, right?
So that's okay. If you have not encountered any of those, leave it blank. You don't have to submit. Okay. Thumbs up if you're done.
I will end the poll at this point. I don't see any.
Hold on a second. I want to see, make sure everybody's done. So thumbs up if you're done.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And I'm ending the poll right now. All right. And now I will share the results of the poll.
Looks like most of you have encountered either yourself or know someone encountered the introvert scenario.
Yep.
The least of you is on the fact that you want to get promoted, but because the reward system is focused on individual. Interesting. Just a raise of hands. How many of you actually did not vote because none of these applies to you? Okay, one. For those of you who do not have video on, the raise hands is actually, if you click on participants, you see raise hands, then we can see that you're raising hands. All right, so only one. Cool. Thanks, JF.
All right, I will stop sharing. All right, now, once we've gone through that poll, we are now going to a secondary poll. This time, we are going to present you with all 4 scenarios, and we will present you with potential solutions that you've done or will do. Just give us an idea of how you'll answer these scenarios. So for now, let me bring up the poll. Second poll, what would you do in the scenarios? There are 4 questions, one for each scenario, so please scroll down. It'll take some time. Each scenario, you can only give 1 answer. So I'm launching the poll.
And for those of you who have not encountered any of the scenarios, in case you have, what would you have done? So answer it that way. We'll give you 5 minutes.
Jeff, if none of the options are applicable, what do we do?
Just leave them blank.
Okay.
No, this is not assuming that we are this person. We're assuming we're in this situation and that there is this kind of a person, this kind of a situation going on. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, is everyone done? Just give an indication, thumbs up. Looks like it. I'm seeing some chat comments. I think we are good to go. So I am ending the poll unless I hear otherwise. Okay, I am ending the poll. Let me now share the results of the poll. Scenario 2, sharing the results. It's fairly long, but we can all start looking at some of the responses of people. So a bunch are either ignore, run away, force the good worker.
Well, actually, so interestingly, the introvert scenario, more of you is actually forcing the good worker. Wow. And for company and executive pressures, you just ignore and run away. Ooh, okay. Same with pressure from society.
Might be worth asking how many people were unable to vote on a single one of those bullets.
Yeah, I was completely unable to.
Okay.
Didn't see any good options.
Okay. So for the people
I voted for ignoring because none of the others seemed any better.
So, yeah, for me as well, I didn't find a good option to select.
Okay. So for those of you who voted, okay. Well, hopefully after this talk, you won't be ignoring this and you'll be running away, nor will you be trying to force people. And hopefully you'll be able to actually address these issues appropriately without overriding your management and doing any of that. So Thank you, JF. You can end the poll. You can
Stop the share.
stop the sharing.
Did you just say that at the end of this talk, we will gladly not take any of these options you just gave us?
Hopefully you would be able to do it appropriately without forcing people or overriding your management or ignore it and leave it to someone else.
That sounds like a yes.
So none of the options in the poll were appropriate or at any point useful.
Correct.
Okay, good. Just check it.
And interestingly enough, that's usually the tack that most people take. As a coach, I've seen that happen a lot. A lot of it either ignore.
I believe you.
It has someone else dealing with this scenario. So.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, so without further ado, we are actually going to dive into those scenarios that you have been silently reading. So I am actually on slide 14, if you're on a slide deck, if you want to take a look. Or if you don't want to take a look, it's fine too. You don't have to read it. So we're going to dive into scenario 3. So let's meet our software architect, John. He is Asian. He is in his mid-30s. He does great work and he consistently improves. He also does a lot of research. He mentors junior members. He's very happy where he is. He does not like to climb the ladder, meaning go into management. He wants to do hands-on work. Luckily, he's in Silicon Valley, and he has the option of going into the technical track instead of management track. So for those of you who don't know what technical track is, it's a way for the technical folks to get advanced levels without being in management. Now, his parents, on their hand, in Taiwan, call him a disgrace because he is still an individual contributor, not a manager. I mean, they expect him to be at least a director since his parents know someone else's son. It's a VP in his early 30s. So, and this is very typical of Asian culture. Oh, actually, have you guys read or watched Crazy Rich Asians? Yes? Okay. Do you think it's exaggerated? Some yes, some no, some like, I don't know. Okay. Well, from our perspective, some of the exaggerations actually hit very close to home because it actually happened to us in real life. Which is to say, John's parents don't understand the concept of technical track at all. I mean, John is an architect maybe of the same level as a director, but technical track doesn't have the word director in the title. So he's unhappy. He doesn't know what to do. How can he satisfy his parents and at the same time not become management? And nothing in Agile literature says anything about what to do. Now, as we tackle this particular scenario, we're going to provide patterns of questions that help at arriving to a solution in an Agile manner. So the first question to ask is, what does climbing the ladder actually mean? Well, short answer is, go into management, right? In order to move up the levels in the traditional sense, you will have to become a manager, then a director, then a VP.
However, for us in Silicon Valley has a different mentality, which is not the norm for the US, let alone the rest of the world. Silicon Valley's mentality is that you don't have to go into management in order to move up the levels. There's something called the technical track, as Moonway said. That is, as you become a senior developer and architect, you will go up the levels. And from a level perspective, you usually end up an architect being at the director level.
However, from a cultural perspective, parents, family, friends from other cultures and backgrounds, they won't really understand what architect actually means the way the Silicon Valley defines it. In fact, not even here in the US, outside of Silicon Valley would understand. People would normally associate architect with someone like I.M. Pei, who is the architect for Louvre Glass Pyramid in Paris, not someone who builds search engines. The question that one would get from friends and families and parents are, well, how many people report to you? Well, no one. Well, then how senior can you be? because the status and title must go together. If you're missing one, you're really good for nothing.
And also the technical track only goes so far, normally up to a director level. If you want to be a VP, you will definitely need to go into management. Perhaps the only high-ranking individual contributor in a technical track is a CTO, and usually that's one person in the entire company, and it's also usually the co-founder of that company.
Oh, and what happens if you're not technical? Let's say you are product management, now called product owner. What does that mean? What's the career path? I mean, you get the same question. Do you have anyone reporting to you? Well, why aren't you a chief product officer yet?
So as a coach or scrum master, you will need to be conscientious of your team and its different cultures, even if it's a US company without any offshore offices. And this is very pervasive in the Valley.
Now that we know what climbing the ladder means, the next question to ask is, what are the criteria for promoting to a manager versus a director versus a VP? Now, obviously, there are a number of different criteria depending on the company and which country you're in. However, there are some universal ones, and we'll give some examples. First, when we use the term promotion, if you think of it, there are actually 3 categories of understanding that actually associated with it. One is there's a universal understanding what manager, director, and VP means. Second is the measurement for promotion. And the third is the responsibilities expected when you're promoted. Let's dive into each one.
So the first one that we need to do is we need to understand what a manager or a director or VP means. There seems to be a universal understanding across industries and around the world that manager equals people management. And the differentiation of the levels is the sphere of influence. For example, a manager is responsible for a small group of people in a team. A director is responsible for multiple teams, and a VP is responsible for several lines of business or a business unit where VPs have more people under them.
Then we need to understand what measurements for promotions are. What are you actually being measured on? Now, there are universal categories, some universal categories of measurement. For example, your craft and your domain. You know you're responsible for that. Example is if you're an engineering director, you should know the technology well. You provide the technical direction and build a high performance team for delivery. Unfortunately, that's not the bulk of measurement. You are also being measured on other very subjective things like communications, leadership. So let's take communication. What is it? It's an effective two-way communications between teams and management. So you present, business concept to teams and groups, then understand what's going on, know the updates to present to your team, to upper management. So for example, the first line manager will represent the team, report up to the director. The CEO will represent the company at the board level. Leadership, well, what does that really mean and how to measure that? Well, it's supposed to motivate high performance, provide clear direction, empowerment, lead by example, model integrity and accountability. Oh, but let me ask you a question. Is staying late on a Friday night a good model if you lead by example? Not quite. So how do you motivate them to be higher performing without dictation, but providing clear direction and empowerment? Now, while leadership is a universal measurement, it's actually very nebulous. There are many, many styles of leadership, and it's also very subjective. What does it mean by good leader anyway? That definition also varies from company to company. Now, there are also a number of other measurements that differ from region to region, company to company. For example, some technical management measure on software delivery lifecycle and delivery. Others measure decision-making, that is, making effective decisions in a timely manner. Well, what does that mean? Agile teams do team-based decision. Is that what that measurement means?
And also, we need to understand some of the responsibilities that are expected in the different levels. What you're measured on is not necessarily the responsibilities you have. Munway already alluded to craft and domain, which is what most people are measured against when it comes to performance assessments. But what about the expected work that is not necessarily told or measured directly? Some examples are mentorship, investing in team members' careers, hiring, performance assessment, budgeting. None of those are measured, but you're expected to do them. And unfortunately, they don't show up in performance reviews. Another example is collaboration along organizational lines. You're expected to do them, and it only shows up in perf reviews if other groups complain, for example, if they don't feel you're being collaborative. So there's an unspoken disconnect in what you're being measured on, typically in large organizations, and what you're responsible for. It doesn't matter what company or which country.
Clear as mud? Well, it should be, because there is no such thing as a universal list for the things we just talked about. We have found that at least in the Silicon Valley, the management responsibility list is a heavily guarded company secret. It's a competitive advantage for companies, so they won't share. We don't know how the rest of the world is on that. Now, the list of the management responsibilities change when one switches companies. The measuring stick is also different between countries and companies. Now, of course, from their perspective, it's all correct. But for friends and family, they have a much simpler view. Do you get promoted or not? Do you have people reporting to you? Do you have more people reporting to you? Are you getting paid more? That's where the cultural consideration comes in.
Yeah. Especially in Asian cultures, putting it another way, it's very simple. You do a good job, you get promoted, people will be put under you. You don't do a good job, you don't get promoted, and you don't deserve to have people under you. So if you're not a director, it means you've not been doing a good job in front of your parents, and it reflects poorly on them from a cultural perspective. They did not raise you as a good son, so that brings kind of shame to the family.
Now let's talk about those universal criteria and measurements. Do they embody the Agile values? Short answer is no, but let's expand a little bit on that. The universal criteria that is expected, which is like, your craft and your domain expertise. The expectation is the higher up you go, the better you are. Is this an Agile value? No. Well, why not? Well, who really should have the expertise? You think of it, according to Agile, the people doing the work, not the VP, right? So this universal criteria is actually contrary to Agile value. Now, there are some other criteria that may sound Agile, but when you look deeper, they're actually not embodying Agile values. For example, decision-making. Expectation is the higher up you go, the more effective you are in making decisions in a timely fashion. So if you are able to give answers to your upper management quickly, you are seen by your management to be effective in making decisions in a timely manner. However, you are actually displaying more a dictatorship behavior, and that's not very Agile.
And also, some companies use the same category that may have slightly different definitions to show that they're aligning with Agile. So let's use the decision making as an example again. It's supposed to ensure that effective decisions are made in a timely manner. However, some companies have put gradations on this measurement. For example, the manager is expected to be developing this skill, while a director is expected to be a master of this skill, and a VP is expected to be mentoring people on this skill. So as an Agile team, you expect management would work with the team to ensure that the team members and stakeholders are aligned with decisions. Initially, it sounds Agile, but in reality, that doesn't happen. Many a time, management would be forced to make decisions against the team's wishes due to a number of reasons like time pressure or competitive analysis. Or they may not even tell the team afterwards what the decision is regarding whether they're aligned or not. I mean, this is office politics. According to Agile, it is the team who decides how to work, not necessarily the manager, the director, or the VP. But on the other hand, management needs to give missing info to the team so that the team can make better decisions. So even when the criteria sounds agile, you may need to look deeper and you may need to find circumstances around that that promote peculiar anti-agile behavior patterns that you see.
So what happens if I don't want to go into management? Can I still be promoted based on my growth and improvement?
Yes, from an agile perspective, you should be. We could even go on further and say that the person has grounds for promotion because of growth and improvement. It should be included in the levels that you define. However, today's idea of growth and improvement in the agile sense does not equate to the traditional views of climbing the ladder.
So what can I do about it? Does Agile ever talk about levels?
Agile doesn't explicitly talk about corporate levels. However, the development and growth that are part of Agile values should be included in the traditional level constructs. Inspect and adapt is inherently Agile. This is the growth that Agile expects. However, the result of inspect and adapt does not have a clear correlation to promotion levels. So we can tease out the management responsibilities and see if we can make it more compliant to an Agile mindset and use the values that can apply to any of the Agile frameworks or practices.
All right, so let's take a look at hiring. Hiring is a traditional management job. Now, let me ask you this. Does everything really need to go through the manager? Like screening the resumes, when to bring the candidate on site, who's on the interview panel, hiring decision, what to do if the candidate hired doesn't work out, etc. How about this? Instead of the manager being the decision maker for everything, why can't the decisions be shared by the entire team, since the new hire is going to work with the team anyways? Let's give another example. Mentoring of people in their craft is definitely something that Agile espouses. However, that is not included in today's measurement of promotion, but it should be. Let's have one more example. Performance management. That's another example of a management duty, and it doesn't seem to be Agile, but in fact is very Agile related. So what is the Agile mindset on this? Let's see, inspect and adapt, getting feedback early and often so it can be actionable, right? Self-organizing team, which means it's team-based. Collaboration wins over individual heroism. Improvements needed is brought up by and discussed within the team and result to be evaluated by the team. Well, how is it done today? Well, assessment is usually done once a year. Feedback is often late and cannot be actionable. Focuses on individual achievement. Improvements are set between managers and individual contributors. So how do we change from what is being done today to become more Agile-minded? That is actually a very big topic to cover, and that does not fit into the time frame that we have today. But we can give you a few examples. Let retrospective be part of the performance assessment. That is, if you're running a 2-week iteration, you will have retrospective every 2 weeks, right? Improvement can be made every 2 weeks. Entire team is rated based on iteration goals. Now, iteration goals are not defined by managers, but they're defined and committed by the team. Then every quarter, managers can gather these feedback, and that's the quarterly assessment, and no additional work is needed. Now, be careful. There are 2 main things actually need to happen to make this to work. One is the team and the manager is to focus on the trend of those 2 weeks retrospectives instead of individual comments, because people adjust and improve every 2 weeks. You want to see the trend improving over time. Manager needs to make it a safe environment. There's no judgment, no interceding in any of those 2 weeks retros. Let the team work it out. Manager only steps in and helps when the same problem persists. Now, how the manager actually help is another example of how it can be either Agile or how traditional is being done today. This discussion is also an area that requires more time than we currently have. Now we talk about the quarterly assessment, then how about every year? So by the end of the year, the manager, all he needs to do is just to gather up the quarterly assessment, and voila, you have your annual performance done. So we have taken something that is traditionally not seen as Agile, but a management duty, to now be a part of the Agile team, contributing to their growth and development. But how does that work? You may ask, how does that work with the existing definitions then? People in the organizations can translate this to levels with HR's help and collaboration. Organizations always have a hierarchy, which is very much anti-team. However, every Agile framework also have its own hierarchy. Now, since no one understands what team captain means, but everyone understands director and VP, why don't we map the Agile hierarchy into existing corporate nomenclature?
So with that, how does one map the Agile hierarchy and values into the existing corporate nomenclature?
Oh, that depends on how much the company can stomach. There is a cautious approach and there's a radical approach.
This is where good coaches come in. For the cautious approach, you leave HR alone in the end. You leave the corporate taxonomy intact. You separate out the HR roles, meaning manager, director, and VP, versus the actual responsibilities. Now, once you have these actual responsibilities, you might take a look at the roles that have these 10 management duties defined in the HR definition, and maybe a subset of these, like 6, is enough to redefine a promotion of a level. For example, hiring. If someone on the team is made responsible to hire, including screening resumes, who should be on interview panel, make the decision to hire, as well as what happens if the hire doesn't work out, those skills that people in the team demonstrate should be promotable. There are other soft skills as well in a fairly big category that can be broken down. Things like presentation skills, but both internal and external. Internal meaning brown bags, external at conferences or in front of executives. Nowadays, especially with this pandemic, facilitation skills, virtual facilitation skills, not just hosting a meeting on Zoom. If you're able to distribute these skills and map them into an existing taxonomy, then you can apply those Agile values into that taxonomy.
Now, for the radical approach, HR has to be brought in from the beginning. So JF mentioned that if you are doing a cautious approach, you leave HR until the end. So you don't touch HR until the end. But for radical approach, you cannot do that. You have to bring the HR in from the beginning. Now, there are 3, so even within the radical approach, there are a gradation of that. So I'm going to talk about 3 different ones. So the first one is you don't actually change anything in the company. You leave the corporate taxonomy and its definition alone. That sounds like a cautious approach, isn't it? But I am actually asking you to go totally out of the box. So I actually have a real life example. The head of Taiwan office, where John, our architect, works, got really creative and found a way to get that office to be awarded by the city and province that they're in. Province is like state, like California state. So the effect to the local office is the people in the Taiwan office are very proud of that award, and they tell their parents about it. Now this way, John's parents can brag about John to the rest of the friends and family, saying that, hey, John is working, my son John is working in this province awarded company, or translate in American terms, it's California State awarded this company to be like best company or something. That's an honor. And so this way, John's parents can actually brag about John without having John needing to be a director or VP. This actually happens. Now the effect to the rest of the offices is that they are now putting their thinking caps on to see if there are anything in their culture or environment that they can actually do. So that's one radical approach, which is totally thinking out of the box while leaving all the taxonomy intact. Now, if you actually want to start changing things, you would like to redefine the levels and career path. One example is to change the performance evaluation from a narrow measurement to a holistic assessment. This broader evaluation would evaluate both delivery and behavior. For delivery, you think of it traditionally, you may ask something like, hey, is it delivering against schedule? Do you deliver all the features that you promised? However, I would like to challenge us to think differently. Delivery is about ambition to action. We need to pressure test these measured results. So for example, you may want to ask this instead. Are you delivering towards the strategic objectives? How ambitious are the targets? Which risks were taken? For the delivered results, are those sustainable? Now for behavior, it's about living the Agile values, meaning it's like a day-to-day observations, which will result in the iteration to iteration evaluation or retrospective and improvement. So if you think of it this way, if the x-axis is a behavior and the y-axis is a delivery, then you know how to reward people, because that is if when they progress diagonally towards the upper right-hand corner, that can be the criteria for promotion. By the way, you can read this up in Beyond Budgeting. Now, the third one is totally radical. Now, this one is not for the faint of heart, because not only the HR is involved, now you need to get the finance involved, because we are changing how the budget is being done. Currently, most US companies do a fixed forecast, and every time a forecast needs to be changed is a big change management process. So for example, US companies usually have an annual budgeting process, which includes the next 12 months forecast. The finance folks may do a quarterly reforecast afterwards if it's absolutely necessary, and it is a big event. All the numbers from the bottom have to add up to the top, even to the decimal point. Now, why is this important? Because part of the purpose for budget is for resource allocation, meaning to know what it takes to make it happen, which includes salaries, bonuses, and rewards. We need to remember, forecast is what we think will happen. By definition, we have limited information when we do a forecast 12 months out. Things can change. Isn't that what Agile keeps saying? Also, when you have a fixed budget, it means the resources fixed. That is, these group of people are going to work on this project. So if you have more people joining the project than forecast, or you have less people joining the project than forecast, oh dear, the entire model needs to change. And it needs reforecasting. As you know, in Agile, we don't have a concept of people having fixed roles, working on fixed things. People can move around based on project needs, workers' preference, etc. So it's better to have a more dynamic allocation, which will need finance's cooperation. Again, it's more about a trend monitoring than hitting the KPIs. Oh, by the way, the I in the KPI is indicator. So by definition, indicators are only there to guide. It's not KPT, the key performance truths.
So what we've just gone through here is, through the questions, try and apply some of the Agile values and principles in solving a particular cultural problem that we've observed. And I see there's already a bunch of questions in the chat, so maybe we can go take a look at that and see how we can address some of those questions. So.
Can I speak to some of the stuff I was typing a bunch of things. I was trying to pick up on the pressures, the parenting side, the social, cultural, but also mapping it to other conditions that might result in the same situation, absent any cultural consideration. And the one that I can think about is that as soon as you enter and attempt an Agile transformation in a deeply traditional company, or one with deeply rooted hierarchy, playing outside of that hierarchy is very risky for those participants. So then they feel like they're walking into a dead end, and they might resist, they might fear, they might have other reactions. So I think what you're describing is true in those situations as well, which so even without that external influence.
Yes, very much so. And then most, at least for me personally, my experience as a coach, for example, at Yahoo, when we were doing enterprise transformations, some of the weird behaviors that I started seeing could be traced to some of that, and some of the cultural things behind the motivation. People would act in a certain way, and you're trying to understand, why are they acting that way instead of this, what you expect from an Agile perspective. And a lot of times it's also about their culture. It's not vocalized. You just realize that as you observe more and try and understand the dynamics of the people in your team, right?
And I'm also seeing some chat about, and I definitely have seen it, that because of these issues, people start making up titles. Like, I'm the senior Scrum Master. Like, what does that mean? So things like that is to satisfy, obviously, some of these needs. So instead of, making up.
Hold on.
Sure.
Isn't that just an example of a technical track and being able to progress within a technical track?
You mean the senior Scrum Master?
I'm a junior Scrum Master. I can tell my, left foot from my right foot. I'm a senior Scrum Master. I actually have heard about Agile, and I'm director level Scrum Master because I've actually experienced Agile.
It is one way to look at, to say that, hey, this is a progression. But if you are looking from a Agile perspective, there's no such thing as junior or senior or director Scrum Master. Scrum Master is Scrum Master, and you need to have a certain level of knowledge. From what I have seen and from what I was told, because I asked people, why do you put these things there, is they don't think that, for example, use Scrum Master as example, they don't see that there is, first of all, a career path. So what you are explaining is a career path. Like, hey, I am actually improving. You should acknowledge the fact that I'm improving. But there's no such thing in Agile. Like for Scrum Master, there's no such thing. So I'm inventing junior, senior, and director. And another thing is that people.
No. You're implying that as soon as I call myself a Scrum Master, I'm effective. That's a really big leap.
So I think
if I'm beginning and early in my craft, I'm kind of clumsy. After 5 years of Scrum Mastering, I'm a good mentor to Scrum Masters that we just hired last month.
So I think it's two different issues that we're discussing. And these are the two different things that I have seen as I coach people. One is exactly what you said, right? Hey, I just started out, versus someone who has been at the job for some time, is obviously experienced. And so you call that experienced person senior. However, a lot of times if you are diving deeper, after you said, hey, I'm more experienced, so I should be called senior, is also differentiation for people to see what is really the motivation. You need to dig a little deeper. And when I ask people, it's because, as Cesar said, a lot of the companies, the taxonomy is very much ingrained in people's mind. And so if I'm a Scrum Master, when I first joined, I'm still a Scrum Master. 5 years later, I'm still called a Scrum Master. 10 years later, that doesn't sound too good. I'm not improving. It doesn't sound like I'm improving. But you are, right?
No.
So two things, hold on, two things. So one thing is whether you are actually improving and you're learning and growing, that's one thing. The other thing is how people actually see you from the outside. When you are talking to people from the outside who don't actually even know what Scrum Master means, for most part, then all they see is you have this exact same title for 5 years and for 10 years in a row. And they interpret it as you're not advancing. What's wrong with you? Are you a lazy bum? They sit on your behind and not do things. That's why you don't get promoted. Or what's going on here, right? So there are two different issues. Now, I have to say, Silicon Valley, for those of us in Silicon Valley, the way that we see things, it's very different from the rest of US and the rest of the world. I have actually worked in offices around the world. So I have realized that, wow, the viewpoint that we have here in Silicon Valley is very different. Let's use the Scrum Master as the same example again. Most people outside of Silicon Valley would actually said their first problem is not about whether they're growing. Whether they're growing or not is an internal thing that they would know. The most biggest problem is people thinking that they're not advancing. 10 years is still the same title. Something is wrong with you. So we are trying to address this problem, and we're trying to say that while you're growing, there are a lot of things that the current definition of those titles, it's not definitely not embodying the Agile value and is not helping us. Now, how can we actually change that? And that's what we're talking about, right?
The reverse is also true, though. And I guess maybe now this helps me understand a little better the gap between what I was trying to say and what you just said. A very, very pervasive pattern that exists is one where the title is created to acknowledge the seniority in some other discipline of the existing participants of the hierarchy. So the VP gets the senior Scrum Master title and hasn't been a Scrum Master a day in his life or her life, right? That is also happening, and it's really, really bad. It devalues and renders the title meaningless. But I think, although my head was going in that direction, I think you're more in the camp of how can we create a credible, effective, just enough of a hierarchy to provide, and perhaps also catch what Volker is describing, which is provide the career pathway for a craft, and for that to be an equal participant, equal player, equally rewarded path to a managerial track or maybe something else. So it's not a technical coding track, which we know already exists, and quite successfully so, even all the way to VP at, for example, some banks, some other industries have done a decent enough job of this. But doing that with the some of the non-team member, still team member, but some of the other roles in Agile structures. Is that where you're at?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. A lot of these titles, when I when I coach people and when I talk to them and when I look at what they're doing, when they add the senior on top, they are actually not thinking about a career path. They're thinking of the existing taxonomy that they have and try to map this new Agile thing into their existing thing. So you think that, okay, I need to have these levels as well. I need to slap into this, and then, but how do you get those levels, right? Not necessarily means your experience, to be very honest. Because, hey, if you have a, I don't know, master's degree, and if you have however many years of work experience, okay, you are expected to get a certain level of things. So they're now trying to map these things into these Agile terminologies, positions as well. What we are trying to say is that, hey, people, if you're truly Agile, you are definitely supposedly continuously improving and growing. How can we acknowledge that, first of all, in the existing taxonomy? Is it a way? Yes, there is. And we just shared with you there's a a cautious approach versus a radical approach. Is there a career path actually for things like Scrum Master, which people, or product owner, which people may not necessarily know what that means because it's not these traditional titles. Is there a career path? Absolutely, right? And that also needs to be defined. And you're absolutely right. Hey, I just learned. I am junior versus I have been actually doing this for the last few years. I'm experienced in this.
And the challenge is the organization breaking through that first instance where the more senior leaders don't have the experience required to maintain that status or that level or that existing title, or even to map it over to a new title. One example, without naming the company, and not specifically Agile, actually Lean Six Sigma, huge company that wanted to roll that out and saw it as a competitive advantage to have at least 50%, maybe a much higher number of the employee base and leadership be properly trained in Lean Six Sigma. And the way that they did it, because they had a very strongly structured promotion career path and levels and all that stuff, was that they embedded it into that system. And they said, if you want to be a director, you need to be black belt. And guess what? Day one, like, do you get fired if you're a director because you're not a black belt? So then you need to put yourself on the path to eventually become a black belt, which requires you to be a green belt first, and to work with external consultants that are themselves black belts and embed that into the DNA of the organization. So that transformation plan, working in strong partnership with HR, was very effective for them. And then what we did was try to ride that same horse, that same approach, to then get into the Scrum Master, product owner, and other roles there. So for a senior director, well, if we say that being a Scrum Master is actually mostly or a lot about managing flow and throughput and removing impediments, it's not good enough for a senior leader to say, I remove impediments all the time, right? You need to rise to the level that way above where you're expecting your Scrum Masters that are in your reporting hierarchy are already able to do. So you need to know about how to manage flow. You need to take some Kanban courses. You need to figure out how to optimize throughput and how to identify bottlenecks and how to test and run experiments to validate your hypothesis about what's going to happen and all of those things.
JF, you are muted.
For the sake of timing, because we're a little over at this point, we can take a little bit of a pause on this one. We've actually went a little bit over, 5 minutes over. We're going to still keep a 10-minute break for now. So if anybody needs to use the bathroom or whatnot, we can take a 10-minute break. I will have a timer for 10 minutes. I will share my screen so you can all see it. We will come back in about 10 minutes to resume this talk. But yeah, we can.
You need to walk around, stretch your legs. You need to take a bio break. Please go do so, and we will be back.
As you can see with all the questions, this is somewhat of a controversial and fairly large topic. So
you notice that you might not notice, I'm now standing. So I'm also going to go and stretch.
All right, see you guys in 10 minutes. Or
10 minutes.
9.5.
Yeah.
Are you interruptible, JF?
Yes, I am. What's up? How is it going, Volker?
I am more confused now than I was before.
Yes, because when I first encountered this, I was like, what's going on? When I was coaching, especially in at the enterprise level, there were certain things that I was like, why am I seeing certain behaviors? It's not supposed to be this way. And a lot of it could be the motivations behind it, some of it cultural, some of it hierarchical in an organization. And this one is kind of a talk to look at the cultural aspects of it. and try and understand that, because when we go into, let's say, coaching companies here in the Valley, we assume more or less, we make assumptions that the culture is homogeneous. You understand?
No, I think it goes further. The assumptions are going further. Like, hierarchical structures are necessary. That's an assumption.
Yes.
The head count of people reporting to a position or not.
Yes.
That is a meaningful, I don't know, metric. Is
when you are looking at, promotions, unfortunately, a lot of things are at play. It's the fact that you can actually do your craft, it's actually a very small part of it. A lot of people is using that as a empire building. Their ego comes into play.
yeah, but that already is the antithesis to Agile.
It is.
So
it is.
So I didn't understand, like, none of what you suggested provides an answer. I mean, there's sort of what I'm missing is a little bit of a question of, like, what are the needs, the legitimate needs that we're trying to meet? Like, having a budget or having to make estimates is a legitimate need from the business. We can't just start building something without having a sense whether it's the Empire State Building or a garden shed. So, for decision making, I need to have some sense of, what we're building, and that requires estimation. Now, our assumptions of what an estimate looks like obviously need to be radically revised to still meet the need without boxing in the team and producing a whole slew of unwanted behaviors.
You are absolutely right.
And so there are legitimate people management needs that the organization still needs to meet. But how they will be met could be radically different than, say, having a manager. Yeah, I mean, we don't want to pay people who don't work.
That is very true.
So
that is
the team should be able to decide who they want to have on their team and who's not pulling their weight, and therefore they don't want to work with them. Is that a manager's role?
When, at least for me, when I was working in my, as I said, I only bite the bullet last year to become a consultant. I've been working within a company. When I was going up the ladder, which I wasn't trying to, it's just, hey, something is actually hindering the team to actually produce. And so I go into that group and go, what's going on? Let's see what I can do to help. And that allows me to actually touch a number of different things. And with that, the level goes up because as a junior level or a lower level, you are not allowed to touch all those other things. So I was actually, rise all the way up to chief of staff. I saw a lot of things in executive management staff when they look at things is very different from the team's perspective, even from middle management perspective. It's very, very different.
Yeah.
Right. They are looking basically at now, whether they're agile or not, it's actually very funny because some of them are agile, some of them are not. And even the agile ones, oh, sorry, I think there's a timeout.
Actually, I just want, for the sake of, being able to keep within the schedule.
Sure.
I mean, if you guys can close the discussion, because we only have an hour and a half, but we've left some time for the end. But I just want to be mindful of people's time and the time they're spending on this. So the 10-minute break is up. So
all right, well, let's see if we can do that at the end. I'll have an end. We'll have a little discussion at the end.
Yeah.
All right, JF.
Thank you. We are now back from break. So we've gone through some of the steps tackling scenario 3. And this time we would like to tackle scenario 4 as a group. Let me give the backstory. For those of you who are following on the slides, I'm on slide 22. So here's scenario 4. Scenario 4 is basically, the backstory is Michelle. She's an excellent engineer. She is very technical, similar to John from our previous example. She loves what she does, but she's also a very good mentor in terms of bringing up junior members. Unlike John, however, she wants to get promoted. From an Agile perspective, she's a really good collaborator. However, the current standards of promotion all point to individual achievements and contributions, and not necessarily team collaboration. So taking some of the things that we've gone over in scenario 3, and you can look back on your slides on some of the questions, we'd like to ask you, what are some of the questions to consider, and in kind of in what order to ask, are appropriate for this scenario? Let's take a moment to see this and think about this. And once you have thought about it, I would love to hear from about maybe 3 volunteers, two or three volunteers.
Who notices that she's doing a good job?
The team, her manager. They notice an impact in the way she collaborates with people and that they get stuff out of it from her. But all the metrics of success are not necessarily on collaboration. When you potentially look at maybe the hierarchies inside the organization.
See, in that case, the manager wouldn't notice.
So,
because the manager isn't there day to day, so they don't know that she's a critical facilitator or catalyst, or say an amplifier of everybody else's performance. So the manager wouldn't notice. It's only the team that knows.
Maybe.
Or, you know, the manager only notices because the team keeps telling her that, you know, she's a great, you know, she's so pivotal to the performance.
Yep. So
okay.
let's go back to the questions that we asked for the first scenario. Are there any questions there that seem to help frame?
For the first, for like the number 3, so you should start in like slide 15 onward?
Yes. So we gave you about 6 questions. And is it all 6 questions, or is it a subset of those 6 questions?
I'm struggling with the questions.
Yeah, me too.
Like, do universal criteria and measurements embody agile values? It sort of implies that there are universal criteria. I have not met a company who has been able to pull that off.
Okay. Let's potentially start at the very beginning then. What is the criteria first for promotion, right? What we need to do is to start with a base understanding. In this case, what is the criteria for the promotion? It definitely differs between company to company. There may be slight differences. Those slight differences may impact how, as a coach, you might offer a solution so that the solution actually enhances some of the Agile values. So as a coach, you want to see the criteria, see how potentially the criteria can be made more Agile value-like, and then see where that direction takes you. Is that helpful?
I'm way too radical. I'm so drawn out of the outside the lines here. I mean,
that's even better. If you're radical, can you do the radical approach though?
You know, I think we're going back to the first poll where I answered like ignore it and run. If someone invites me into Cisco or Visa or Yahoo to do Agile coaching, I know I'm not going to be happy with the solution. There's just no way in that cargo cult environment that is so hierarchical that Agile has even the slightest chance. We're just now using different vocabulary to do waterfall and you know, talk about values. There's such a big disconnect that it's like a square peg in a round hole problem.
Is there? Can we possibly come up with solutions?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at X scale, and Peter, whatever, Merrill, the Australian guy, he comes up with radically participatory, non-hierarchical, rotating roles to try and unscale, you know, the situation where, you know, our French colleague at Wells Fargo, who has, I don't know, 3,000 teams that they're trying to agilize, like with 15 release trains. You know, you have a different problem at that point.
Yeah.
And Agile is not part of the conversation.
No. But I think if we take some of these ideas, though, and see potentially how we can change them and make it more Agile-like, I think that is the main exercise, right? For what it's worth, I was a Yahoo Enterprise coach.
No, that's why I used it as an example. I mean, you know what you're talking about. I really don't, because I never tried. But
so it goes back to the approach. Do you want to be the radical approach, or do you want to be the cautious approach? Because depending on how you approach this, you will come up with different answers. And so in order to push this forward, think about the approach you want to do, whether you want to potentially do a cautious approach or a radical approach, but then hopefully use certain questions, which I will share with you, to frame a potential solution for this problem, right?
One thing I would like to say is it's not actually a coach's decision to choose a cautious approach or radical approach.
Yeah.
Right? It is the coach's actually understanding of whether that company is ready to stomach, what the company is ready to stomach.
Yep.
Right. What Volker said is, yeah, some enterprises like, oh, you mean, forget that. They're not ready. They don't want to touch any of that. So you're not going to go in and go, okay, let's, you know what? We're going to rotate roles. We're going to, no. Like, you know, you'll be out the door. Right. The question is, if you have either if you're stuck in a gig like that, or if you are actually in that environment, does it mean there's nothing you can do? Of course not, right? So the point of this talk is, what actually can you do to help companies like that to actually slowly, or depending on how you're doing it, getting it faster, to actually changing. Or if you're really good at this, you get them to change without them even knowing that you changed them, which is actually what I did in my last company. They had no idea that that is Agile, but it seems to work. Seems to be easier. The process, HR process is easier. The HR came to ask me, what did you do? Can we make that as a corporate policy? Right, so it's up to you. And so that's why we have this talk is, what can we do to help people with these scenarios, or if you're in a company, that you can actually help them change to be a bit more agile or to be very agile, right? So what we introduced just now is a logical series of questions. What do you ask first? Because these are some level set questions you need to know. And then what's the next question you should ask? What's the next question you should ask? And this will allow you to get your answers in a deeper and deeper level so that you can understand, now what can I change? What can I do to actually help them change to be more agile, right? That's really the whole point and crux of it. So with that said, with this particular scenario, maybe we'll walk you through this, since this is probably new to a lot of you. So as JF said, there are some level set questions that you would still need to ask, right? So our first question in the previous scenario is, what does climbing the ladder means? Now, you would think that you know. I have found out that that is not a good assumption. That is assumption that you make is not a correct assumption. So this is always a good thing. First question to ask is, what does climbing the ladder means? Because a lot of people say, I don't want to climb the ladder, or I want to climb the, what does that actually even means, right? So each company is different, each job is different, each country is different. So you need to first understand that. After you understand that, then you need to understand, okay, what is the criteria for promotion? Whether you want to be promoted or not, in this particular scenario, this particular person actually wants to be promoted. So what is the criteria of promotion? What does the company actually says? Now, then the third is, well, then you look at those criteria and says, well, do those criteria actually embody the Agile values? And I can tell you now, most of them is no, right? So then the question is, well, then do I just give up? Well, of course not, right? So what can I do to make it more supportive of Agile values, right? So these are the questions that you ask, and then you come up with answers. Hey, Volker, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Fuck, sometimes that spacebar thing works and sometimes it doesn't. Anybody have any idea?
I told you, don't use the spacebar thing. Sometimes works, sometimes it's a Zoom thing.
Oh God, it's such a good idea. If it only worked.
You have to hold the space bar
Yeah,
rather than tap it.
Yeah, you have to hold the space bar. And then once you release it, you're mute again.
The thing is, though, you have to be in focus of the Zoom window or it won't work.
Yes. Anyway, sorry. We digress.
You were saying something, Volker?
Yeah, no, I was just making a smart-ass comment about shooting the HR manager and just getting over it.
I like how you think.
Yeah.
So
action-oriented. I'm liking to make decisions.
So I hope that sort of makes sense to you guys, right? So if that's the case, then your question really to ask is, if you want to help this person, is, hey, what is the criteria for promotion currently? Right? Once you understand that, you ask, hey, do those criteria embody Agile values? Most likely no. Then you're going to ask the question, okay, what are you going to do about it to make it more supportive, right? That's where your creative juices are that you can help that person. Does that make sense? All right, so I'm going to.
I have a sort of a perpendicular question between sort of how in larger, like in more functional environments, not necessarily the worst case. What are some of the people management responsibilities that we're sort of implied now in supervisor or director, that we could do in an agile environment without having to kowtow to the industrial assumption from 100 years ago?
Very good question. For a very short answer, because this is actually a very huge topic that can take the whole time. First of all, there's no universal list of management responsibilities. Every company define it differently. And
of course, I'm not looking for universality, but just, I mean, the organizations have legitimate needs. Performance evaluations, decisions on raises and bonuses. What are some of those legitimate needs that are currently, by default, falling into the court of a people manager, whether that's a good way of doing it or not?
So I think we gave examples just now on exactly performance management, hiring, mentoring people, decision-making, communications, right? We gave those examples. Oh, and leadership, especially if you go up, right? Now, each of what those means is a little bit different, so especially leadership, communications, decision-making, those types are very different definition, even if they have the same terminology.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I work in leadership development, and there's no definition of leadership that's other than, you know, helping make things go better. But beyond that, there's nothing.
Well, so maybe a little recap of what we talked about in the previous section, right? We are suggesting that traditionally, these hierarchies, they have a certain sort of responsibilities that are attached to a certain level. My fundamental question is, does it have to be attached to those levels? Can those responsibilities be teased out and spread it across the team? So the example I gave is hiring. Does it have to be a management responsibility? Can it be a team? Yes, it can. I have worked in agile companies that actually the team do all the hiring, right? Now then the question is, now that the team have these team members have these skills, can they be promoted? Yes, it should. Yes, it should, right? These are skills that, as you said, part of the company needs, and they can actually do them. Now you're redefining the criteria of what does promotion means. Does that make sense?
From an individual perspective, having been referred to HR twice for, let's call it insubordination, in my career, and both times being given my boss's job eventually as a result, it is very risky. It is very risky because, for example, one of the instances for me personally was getting to a point where the team clearly didn't agree with the prioritization, allocation of work, individual allocation of work that was getting in the way of teamwork, and individual reward system, but all were willing to sacrifice, have some sacrifice, and potentially all be referred to HR. But because I was the one that instigated this idea, it was me that had to face the music, and they all knew it. And I was the first one to say, this is what I will do. Are you with me, type of thing. And they were. So so the first thing I did was to essentially put down, metaphorically, I grabbed something at some Post-its, and I put it down in the middle of a meeting room where we were having this conversation. I said, well, there's my project. Unless anybody here tells me that that is the most important thing that this team is working on, I am not going to touch it at all until we finish the most important thing. Silence. Okay, here's the next exercise. We're all going to close our eyes for 10 seconds. And at the end of the 10 seconds, count to 10. And when we count to 10, we'll all be pointing at the person working on the most valuable thing that this team could be doing, and they're working on it alone because we're all working on our separate projects. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 9, 10, and we were all pointing at the same guy. Like, okay, so we all agree what's the thing that needs to happen here. Can we all please work as a team and make it happen? So we decided to go that way. And what happened with this guy, double PhD, had been working on this thing for 9 months. And as soon as we made that decision, we worked on it with him for 3 weeks. Then he went on holiday for another 3 weeks, and we delivered it without him. And it was at the end of that period. So it was in between that period that I got referred to HR, and it was at the end of that period that I got my boss's job. Because I got the thing that would make the company money done in 6 weeks, right? I made that, I created the conditions where the team could make that happen. And in the absence of that, all of the reward systems and all of the prioritization systems and all of the measures were not making a difference. So it's that kind of risk taking that might unfortunately fall on the side of radical idea. And I'm not very good at the other side of the non-radical. It's we all know what needs to happen. Can we just get on with it?
Yeah, I mean, again.
So I'll give an example, right, to make it that I've actually done, which is I've done radical. I have also done more cautious because the company is not able to stomach, and I am usually the most outspoken, and I'm usually the first one to get taken to the principal's office. And so, one too many times, it's, usually not really a good thing, although every single time I seem to get promoted. But what I did is, like, for example, with the teams, right? The teams thinks very differently. And so one of the teams, what I did is, hey, you know what? Forget about all the roles and responsibilities that you know of, right? Here's your manager. They were supposed to do X, Y, Z. And I was like, you know what? Forget all about that, right? You are the team. You are the team who is responsible to delivering this product out the door. You know what it takes to actually deliver. Why don't you write down all the responsibilities that actually needs to happen in order to get that thing out the door? Right? Don't worry about the roles. I don't care if it's a director who needs to do this, somebody else's manager. No, none of that. What does it take? Right? Write it all down. They don't know that. So they start writing it down, and then there are like a zillion of them, right? So then I go, okay, now for the next release, is everything actually necessary? Well, no, because it's not a major release, so a lot of stuff is not necessary. Okay, cool. What are the stuff that's necessary? Okay, so they have a set, right? Once they have a subset, I said, now, what can you guys do? So of course, immediately, like, the engineers said, okay, I do coding. So they took like the coding. Oh, by the way, I have them write down one for stickies. So there are tons of stickies, all scattered around floor, conference table, window, like, you name it, it's all stickies all over. So immediately you have people like grabbing stickies, like, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Okay, great. Like, this is traditional role, right? They know this is my functional job. Ooh, there's still a lot of stickies left. Who are gonna do that? Oh, well, no. Not managers. Can any of you guys do any of those? So they start looking at it, right? Traditionally, it's not their job, but they start looking and say, hey, you know what? We know how to do that. Great. Do you want to do it in the next release? Okay. So slowly, those stickies start disappearing. That people start grabbing onto it. Now, once they actually did it a couple of times, well, guess what? Now they have learned those skills that are traditionally adhered to, hey, this is this level job. But they're doing it. They're doing it well. They're delivering. They're delivering well. Now I take that and I went to management and said, hey, can we have a talk? We would like to actually change the definition of these levels that you define. And as far as HR is concerned, the level is exactly the same. I didn't touch it. The role is exactly the same. I didn't touch anything. What I did is I just changed the definition with the manager's blessing, because now it's actually demonstrated that it's done, and manager's like, oh, okay, sure, all right, right. So that's more of a cautious approach. So that's so that's an example, a real example that actually happened, right? So you don't. I know what Cesar and Volker are saying. Hey, this is what it needs to get done. So why can't we just get on with it? But with a company that is not willing to stomach that, there are things that we can do, right? And this
Yeah.
talk is, what can we do about it, right?
Yeah. As a coach, I reiterate that fact that Manuel said. I mean, being at Yahoo was a very large enterprise, and there were certain things I could not touch. But what I did was try and encapsulate and localize what can I change locally in my own sphere, right? Make that happen and show the results that enhance the Agile values and delivery, and then go back to manager and say, look, this is what happened when we did this. Can we make some slight changes at other places and other locations? Sometimes I'd get a yes, sometimes I'd get a no. Sometimes I wouldn't even bring it up because sometimes it might be a little too much that people are like, no, we don't want that, right? But we kept doing it for the groups that wanted to do it. So it's, as a coach, it's kind of, you have to make that decision. How far do you want to push? You're putting your neck on the line, right? So you might be kicked out. I was kicked out from a few groups in Yahoo, right? So anyway.
So with that said, let's see. So we are actually way over time, of course. Yeah.
Maybe we can do this instead as a group exercise rather than a breakout.
Yeah, this was actually we're actually debriefing because I think it's more, it actually benefit more as we discuss in the as a whole group together. And by the way, I saw that Christopher said that sounds good, but haven't seen it yet work in practice at a large enterprise quite yet. So one of the things I have done, just so that you guys also can think.
You might be referring to the link that he posted a little bit further up.
Let's see. So that's the Google that actually fire all the managers and then bring them all back. Yeah, that's, I'll read that later. So one of the things, if you're working in a large enterprise, actually, that you don't actually change all of them at the same time. Of course, it's never possible, right? So what I have done, for example, especially in large enterprises, it's a global company. So you have a lot of different offices in different locations. What I have done is I actually went to all the different locations outside of the headquarters and basically worked there first, because it's easier for them, because they felt that they are a little bit farther away from the quote unquote mothership. They don't have the executives, senior executives, like always, you know, on their back and always looking over their shoulders. They have a bit more flexibility because a lot of things they do, you know, the mothership is too far away to actually know what they're doing. So I normally, what I did is I would go to their top management over there, convince them, hey, there is a new way of doing things. Usually I would ask them, hey, what are your pain points? Can you imagine there's a new world possible when you do this, right? And then once they are, they said, wow, is this new world really available? Yes, but you will need to try, and it may not work the first try. And hey, here's the things that, you know, it may not work, and you will need to be able to be the shield for this office if you want to see this new world. And normally, you know, when they do want to experiment, then they are very open and they actually do all that. And so that's how I do, literally from, you know, one office to another office to another office to another office. Yes, I know it takes a long time that way. But as I said, you know, when you're in that situation, you have, you know, two choices, right? Either, or three choices. Either it's like, you know what, I'm not going to deal with it. Or, hey, you know what, forget it, I'm going to run. Or you're going to say, hey, what can I do to help, right? So that's part of the sort of cautious approach. So those are also cautious approach, because what happens is when all the remote offices actually have all changed, the headquarters took notice. They realized this. It's like, oh, you guys are doing differently. Well, how come we're not doing it that way? Well, how come you do it that way? Oh, you like it better? How's it better? Because trust me, like performance management, nobody likes to do performance management in any level. Interestingly, even HR hates performance management. I'm like, if you guys are HR, you hate it. Like, why are you even doing this in the first place, right? So this is like the weirdest thing. So if you're able to give them sort of, ooh, there's a new world that could happen that actually able to achieve the goal? Like, what is really the performance management goal anyways? And if we can do a different way to actually achieve the goal, would you like to try? That way, you start getting, people, people's buy-in, and then they like to try things if it works, right? And then you start getting in, and that's how I did it with that particular company, which is, I don't know, about, well, how many people are there? Like 50,000 people, maybe? No, 20,000 people, yeah, globally. So they basically, when all the remote offices have all changed, now the headquarters is like, whoa, why aren't we doing it that way? Because when performance assessment comes, they are the happy people. We are the unhappy people. Why are they so happy about it? Like, that's just not normal, right? So it drives them to want to know what's going on, right? So this talk is really to say, if you want to have that kind of change, what can you do, and how do you even start, right? You don't just go in and say, hey, I have an idea, you got to start, and you got to try. I know it'll work. Like, no, that's not going to work, right? As I said, I'm being put in front of the principal's office way too many times. So this way is I have used this basically approach again and again and again, right? Is the series of questions to ask. This will actually allow you to get to a deeper understanding instead of what you assume it would be. And then you start changing there, right? So I hope that actually makes sense. Yeah? So if that's the case, well,
seems like we've lost a number of people.
Oh, that's okay.
Yep.
That's all right. So I am wondering if we actually just skip to scenario 1 and we can actually discuss it as a group.
We could do that.
Right? There are 8 of us. Let's see if we can discuss this as a group, and let's see if we can use that same approach and perhaps get to some solutions and ideas. How about that? Yeah.
Yep, that works.
So scenario 1 is the introvert.
Yes.
Yes.
Not getting noticed.
That is slide 26. That's right.
So,
right. So the introvert.
1.
Right. Scenario 1 is the introvert who's good at what they do, but seen as not collaborative by the rest of the team.
Oh, by the team?
Well, because he's introvert. So let me give you a back.
I mean, by the time the team thinks someone's not collaborating, he's probably not collaborating.
Right.
Whether it's an introvert or an extrovert, I'm not so sure.
Right.
No,
so
I had this case.
It's a good observation. So let me give you a backstory. Then I'm going to ask you some questions. So meet Mario. He's a UX UI designer. He has a very good portfolio of UX work under his belt that people actually see every day in the team boards that show the UI flows of the product. However, he only works with 1 or 2 people on the team at most. I mean, the other people have had very little interactions with him, even though they have seen his work in the iteration demos. Now, the people whom he has not interacted with thinks he's aloof. He only works with senior architect and the product manager and no one else. However, he's actually quite approachable. If people go to him directly or email directly, individually, he responds and gives very appropriate and insightful answers and feedback. Now, my question to you is, can he be promoted? And if not, as a manager, what can you do to help him? Yes, Cesar.
So I had a case almost like this, almost entirely like this. The specific one was, so I inherited a team or became manager of this team. And it wasn't so much that he was an introvert, although it revealed itself, it showed itself like this, but it's that he was very smart, but very much a cynic. So he was able to go to why what we were doing was stupid and 20 ways in which it was going to fail like that, better than anybody else. But unfortunately, he did that all the time, and that's not what people wanted to hear. So the thing that broke the pattern for him was after just having lunch with him and getting a better sense of what he was capable of, and trying to figure out and create a hypothesis of what might be causing it. Called a meeting with everyone in that environment. It was actually turned out to be quite a large meeting, like something like 19 different people. And I asked the kind of question that obviously always ran inside of his head, because whatever question you asked, he would answer, this is what is going to go wrong. Didn't matter what you asked. But in this particular case, that's exactly what I asked. This thing that we're doing, this thing that you're all working on, what's wrong with it? How's it going to fail? Let's really do some risk analysis. And let's go around the table. And I said, start with you. And I started with the person to the side of the guy. And I went all the way around the table so that he would be last. What that created was that he didn't have to say all of the things that other people could think of. And people were struggling. 19 people, by person number 11, like that person is struggling to come up with things. Number 12, like he's starting to repeat what somebody else has done, just with a slightly different flavor. And it gets to the guy. And he goes, you've all said some really smart things. Here's 3 that none of you have spoken about. And they all went, wow, he can do something that none of us can do. And that just changed the perception of how this particular person could contribute value and what the team was missing out on, because they were not, their posture and his posture as well was not compatible. Completely changed the game for them. And then all of a sudden, everybody was inviting him to pair program. Everybody was including him because they wanted access to that thinking, and it just escaped them and him up until that point. He had scored at the bottom of the hierarchy of the comp 2 years running. So he was at risk of being let go when I inherited this team, and I refused to let him go. Created this, and then he just shot up. Promotion was a different thing, but at least bonus and remuneration, recognition, status, position, all of that, all of those possibilities completely changed for him. And it was, I'm just seeing the comment from Chris. So part of it was coaching him on how to operate in that environment. But part of it was creating the conditions for the team to perceive value in ways that were just beyond their reach. And once both of those things happened, then it clicked.
Yep.
Very good. Thank you, Cesar. So to echo to that, and also to answer Chris as well, that yes, he would definitely need coaching. Whether he get promoted or not is a different story, but he definitely need coaching, right? And the type of coaching is like for the scenario that we talk about, which is slightly different from what Cesar is saying. He obviously knows how to communicate when it's only 1 or 2 people, but he just, he's an introvert, so he doesn't like big group, right? A team to him is a big group, so he tends to run away from big group. So as a lead or a manager, your job is really to coach him to say, how do you actually communicate with people? Because it is not good enough that you are really good at your job, right? Okay, you are UX UI. You are really good at your job. Well, you need to be able to mentor people. You need to be able to tell people, what you're doing. So this is kind of part of the communication that managers need to coach him on. Now, another thing is, especially when he is a UX UI, most likely within the team, there's not that many of UX UI people in the team, maybe 1 at most 2. So it's really easy when you are in that situation, that especially when you already don't like a large team and you like to sort of, oh my gosh, there's a lot of people, you try to run away from it, that your how you communicate will come across as bossy. Like, hey, I'm the expert, okay? None of you know my discipline. I'm just going to tell you, and then that guy can go away. Now, he may not mean it that way, but just because of his tendency that he wants to run away, right? He wants to keep that as short as possible, that he can come across that way, right? So these things are the things that as a manager that need to coach him on, to say, hey, this is how people will perceive it. and then you coach them on how to actually communicate with people, right?
I have a lot of tolerance for how people are, and not jump to them being any different in order to move forward. If they can possibly change or bend the rules enough. For example, in what you just described, if that person is good on one-on-one and a great mentor, I would invite him to record the one-on-one session and then post the recording for everybody else to get the value of that session on that topic, of mastery of that particular thing. And then as that library starts to build, then the perception of the authority that that person has in that domain should have a number of results for them personally, and without necessarily changing their or addressing their fear to work with large groups. If they've got a social phobia, and I have somebody close to me that has that, there's no telling them to change that is going to actually have an effect. You got to give them a different pathway to impact the largest number of people that fits where they're at and who they are. It doesn't always work, and sometimes it is just a matter of, dude, can you try it, because you'll be fine.
Sometimes also, in my experience, it's not necessarily maybe the introvert that you need to work on. It could also be the executive that this introvert reports to. In my case, this is what actually happened. The engineering VP in London was actually not understanding how the manager in Mexico was effective. He's like, I don't hear anything about this. But I was like, oh, well, maybe you don't hear anything about it. Have you tried visiting the office? Because you've never visited the office anyway. Just even asking that one question made him like, oh, maybe I should go visit, right? This was someone who, in a multinational corporation, got promoted to VP of engineering, saw the lay of the land, and was not getting the right input from one of his teams in Mexico. But I, who was part of that team in Santa Clara, was telling him otherwise. And I just basically said, look, part of it is the distance between you and London. Have you even tried visiting? You've been in this position for 6 months now. You've never visited any of the offices outside of London. So that kind of started a track. Even just a small switch like that can help change perceptions. And you're not necessarily changing maybe the introvert, but you're looking at other ways for that introvert to thrive in an organization. So
that's a good point from Chris in the chat about taking a cultural agility assessment or training, and how that cultural development might help. And actually, that's something that I've seen one particular company that I partner with do really well, where they had more or less a dossier to give out to anybody that they sent to any of the other countries in their various locations. Very well prepared, very descriptive, and very compatible for the translation from this particular office and this culture to that one, times all of the possible permutations. It was fantastic to see. And others that are completely clueless. Somebody that approached me saying, hey, I've been asked to lead some training, travel to, I think it was India, travel to India somewhere and deliver some training or other, some Agile related. Can you help me get ready for that? I said, yeah, I can help you decline, because there's nothing that you can do unless you have these conditions. Unless you can partner with somebody that can give you the cultural sensitivity that ensures that the words coming out of your mouth aren't going to offend people. Like, believe me, I was on a call just last week with somebody who did what you're just asking about, and he thought everything was great and he was going to get 5s, like out of 5 in the scorecard. And the commentary was, how dare he? One of the comments was, how dare he tell me to be a servant leader? I'm no servant. Like, and none of that came up during this guy's class. Yes. So it's like, well, dude, unless you want that experience, you need somebody with a cultural sensitivity that can essentially help you use different words to land the messages that you need to say. you need to understand what people are dealing with, and whether it's hierarchy for one culture, whether it's freedom for another culture, whatever that is, and come prepared with the mapping that they're going to go through. And then you need to practice with somebody from that culture in your environment and develop the class. Don't take whatever class you're going to do and just transplant it, even if you've been successful here. Practice it, practice it, practice it here with people from that culture. And just basically, it's a cultural training type of exercise.
And sadly, that's not
a lot of what you're discussing. I think might have that as well implied.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Culture.
Yeah, and sadly,
yeah. So
I wonder if Natalia has something to share here.
Sorry.
I wonder if Natalia has something to share on this topic.
Oh, you're on mute, Natalia.
Sorry. Yes, it's interesting to share this because I'm thinking about once I have a person with, who is really introverted. I couldn't have this person to be integrated to all the team, maybe because of the social phobia. Because yes, he told me a long story of his when he was a child and all that. But the only thing that I could do is to make him to feel important just in his team, not for it. So it's not possible to grow him up to have a better position, but he is like a senior expert, like a SME, subject matter expert inside his team. So it's with a similar like team building, similar that the ones Cesar said. And well, that's the point, but sometimes it happens. You couldn't change a person who has a social phobia, and the company must know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And to be honest, isn't Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, aren't there are tons of examples of deeply introverted, socially awkward people. So I do on occasion wonder whether some of these cases are in fact we're just in their way of them becoming everybody's boss, and just need to figure out how to get out of their way.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, I was actually going to caution people that if you're managers or if you're coaching managers, that don't promote them just because they are, really good at their craft.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna create some problems there. So.
You definitely have to promote them with other skills that you want them to have. So. All right.
So let's take a look at time that we have. Wow. So JF, I am actually thinking that we will do one more scenario with the group discussion, and then we can wrap. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to slide number 28. So this is perhaps sound a bit familiar scenario, because this person, while doing a good job, doesn't actually want to be promoted, but is forced to because of company and executive expectations. I don't know if you guys actually run into a situation like that. So here's a backstory. It actually happens. So Stephen is a wonderful product manager. When he interacts with the team, he gives them a lot of information about why certain things are prioritized in a certain way, or why certain suggestions may not necessarily jive with the product roadmap. He's very effective in getting commitment and actually having the team deliver consistently. He has been asked to mentor other people on other teams as well. His manager raves about him, and the director has heard about the wonderful things he has done with various people. And so both the manager and the director wants him to become a group manager. However, he adamantly refuses. His director then had him run a company-wide initiative. The initiative is mostly just a high-level coordination between various teams to meet the deliverables. He did a wonderful job. So his director and his manager wants to promote him to management. Unfortunately, he hated the experience because it took him away from the teamwork that he loves to do. Now, his manager, his director continue to push him to go into management. So the question to you is, how would you help him? By the way, you may notice that this is actually a subset of scenario 3 that we already discussed in the beginning.
Shoot the manager.
I like your answer. But I don't want you to let
just a variation on the messenger thing.
What if it's not the manager? What if it's the director that your manager reports to? Do you shoot the director?
Shoot him too.
Just put them straight in line so that one bullet takes care of both of them.
Well, we don't want you to land in jail, Volker.
You can tell I choose my clients carefully.
Yes.
That's self-preservation.
Yes, that's a very smart way to do things.
Yeah, yeah. Thoughts, people?
It's very smart to say no to clients, as Chris says. It's very smart to say no to clients, and you don't just take any projects at work. That's great. But for that particular answer, if you remember the poll, this is basically equivalent to what? You leave it to someone else to solve this problem. You're ignoring it. Even though you may not choose this answer. That's really what you're doing. So
you need to talk to the leaders.
Yep.
Come on, you guys are.
For me, it's difficult to think in a person who wants, who won't climb the ladder in a small company, because it's not possible. Not only your boss will ask that if you are greater at your job, but even your colleagues will ask. So maybe if you are greater at your job and you want to climb the ladder, you must choose a big or huge company, trying to not demonstrate. I don't know.
I have an example. You have a relative with a serious, perhaps even terminal disease, and you have no tolerance for uncertainty. You want the certainty of staying in the position that you have for the foreseeable future, and you can't make any further commitments, but you're great at what you do, and you expect that to be valued. I have that in my family in particular, and it's extreme. It's very extreme, but there are cases that I mean, it could be as banal as, if I get promoted, I'll have to travel, and for whatever reason, I don't want to. I want to be the parent that I am. I want to be at games or whatever with my children, or be near my family.
So a question I would like to ask you guys is, what we talk about.
It looks like Janet wanted to contribute. Am I misreading your willingness to turn the video on?
Well, I'm just wondering why we cannot challenge, the company expectations, why we cannot, be more inclusive, in terms of acknowledging that there are people, with different interests in life. Maybe, that person also has other activities that are important to them. So I think it's important to, bring this up as, this other type of employee that, can definitely contribute, but we need to include. And yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I'm agile, so I'm just bringing this up.
But that is one very valid answer that I've actually asked people. Why do you expect people to climb the ladder when they don't want to? What's so bad about that? It is, to some degree, a construct, whether it was done by HR or Wall Street or whatever, to say, no, you're better off promoting people and making sure that they climb the ladder. Look at what, most of the time, there was this one, for example, look at not Warren Buffett, the one who recently died, the one from GE, who always said, you're supposed to—
Jack Welch.
Jack Welch, there you go. Where you're supposed to stack rank people and let go of the bottom 10%. Well, why are you letting go of the bottom 10% if you're supposed to hire the best people, right? So if you have someone who doesn't want to be promoted and likes doing their job, why is that a bad thing?
And they're probably not the bottom 10% anyway.
Exactly.
That's right.
I had a colleague who was, senior engineer, managing 2 or 3 engineering teams, and he told the business owner that he's going to quit or get a demotion. He wanted to go back to writing code, and that was pretty persuasive because he was good at what he did. So, giving him an actual programming position was not, losing him or letting him program. That was a pretty easy choice.
So how can an Agile expert bring this up to higher management? I mean, do you have examples on how this message can be conveyed in a way that, higher management understands and, rethinks on, what expectations they gotta settle for their people?
So for me, from my experience is that upper management see things differently. So for one particular example, how they see it is because a lot of these management, they came from MBA school, they have lots of experience, I shouldn't say experience, I'm sorry. I should say a lot of years in working. And they actually remember how their manager works. And so they think that that's how it should, they should behave. And so when they get to the VP level, then they are replicating what their managers actually do, right? So of course, that would be the older generation, and that, is a different era. And so they do not understand why people don't want to get promoted. You're good at your job. You should be promoted. Why don't you want to be acknowledged? Why don't you want a higher level? Because they themselves, remember, you're talking to VPs and directors. They get to that level because they want to get to that level. Well, actually, in the beginning, they may not want to. And especially if you start technical, you probably don't, especially the first promotion to be manager. No, I don't want to be management. But once you get into that, a number of years later, then you want to climb the ladder because you want to then become a director, you want to become a VP. Your goals have changed. And so they don't understand why you don't want to do that. And they, unfortunately, interpret that your desire to stay where you are as you don't have a growth mindset. You are being complacent where you are. That's why you don't want to be promoted, right? So now all of a sudden, you're supposed to be a really good worker to now you're in the bottom 10% because of what they perceive how you think. And they cannot tolerate anyone who don't want to grow and stagnate. And when you stagnate, you actually are going backwards. That's how a lot of them thinks. Because when I was chief of staff, there are a number of superstars the previous year. And then the next year when we go to the stupid stack ranking meetings, which unfortunately I was in way too many of them, they were put on the bottom percentage and they are supposed to be on the performance PIP, performance improvement plan. Otherwise, they will be guided out of the company. And I asked them why. You just put them on superstar last year. It's like, yeah, but they're still the same. They're not managers. And what do you mean still the same? Like, they're improving in the skills, they're improving this, like, yeah, but they're not management. Like, why do they have to be management? Right. So to them it's a different mindset. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't really understand why they have that mindset. To be honest, I don't understand why they have that mindset.
To me, this sounds like a generational problem. I have coached a lot of Gen Xers trying to manage millennials, that is a train wreck worth watching.
Yeah.
Well, has anyone has an experience, I don't know, trying to convince, higher management that, there is a different way to look at this? Or do you have any idea that you might want to implement in the future on how we can bring this up to them?
Can you say that again? I couldn't follow.
Oh, yeah. So what I'm asking is, do you have an idea of how this could be brought this up to, how we could convince the higher management or make them see, a better,
in this aspect, what we're talking about, that they should consider, people who are perfectly fine, doing the job they do, and they are needed by the company. I feel like sometimes, it's a lot of more waste of money on trying to find a new person, training them. It's like, I see, so much, this, how you say this, over hiring.
Turnover.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, and I think it's such a waste of money and time for everyone, because, the loss or inclusion of a new person, it's, big gap that, that impacts the whole team. Whatever.
What's amazing is that those managers know what that number is, and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, it's $50,000 or more." I mean, it's some non-trivial amount of money, and the chances that they'll find somebody with the talent of that person are very small, and the chances that they'll lose the person because they've been promoted out of their, the place where they want to be, are very high. So they'll end up, basically, it's all downside. You can also argue one of the things that the senior leaders are hoping to get is better predictability. And by messing with the team, by making that change, particularly when it's not wanted, they're actually wreaking havoc on that predictability. The team will not be anywhere near as predictable without that person. If that person is really talented and really good at what they do, and that's where they want to be, that level of that correlates with a high level of predictability that should be worth gold to the senior leaders. So it's maybe putting it in those terms of things that they actually value, and seeing the loss of that as in real terms.
I actually also have a different approach, because when you are that senior, if you're that good, if you look into that person, what that person actually does, to be very honest, most of them, they actually have already done quite a few of those management duties. But those are actually, unfortunately, are not acknowledged and is tied to a certain level, right? So if you say that, hey, I need a manager, or I'm going to be a director, I will be taken away from what I'm doing now, which I like. Now, is it a way to redefine this and say, hey, you say that a manager or director have these management duties, that guy is actually doing it well. Now, if we're going to promote him, but we allow him to continue to do what he is doing currently, instead of what senior management have in their head of what directors and managers are supposed to do, because in their head they have this notion, would that work? And interestingly, some senior management would actually try. And it's like, oh, because of course I would have examples of how that person is doing what, and hey, isn't that already management duties? So from that perspective, he is already doing the job. It's not that because he doesn't want to be promoted, or because he's stagnant, or he doesn't want to grow. Now, what he doesn't want is the other expectations, which is what we talked about earlier in the talk, right? There are things that you are measured on. There are things that the responsibilities you're expected. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that is not even told to you, and somehow is in somebody's head that you're supposed to do. And so if you're not doing them, oh, you're not good, right? So it's really to put all those on the table and said, hey, they're already doing these responsibilities. This is management, right? Now, what is in your head, you think a manager or director should act this way. Can you imagine a director or a manager actually doing what he's doing right now? Because guess what? He's doing all those responsibilities. He's practically doing the job, but not without all those other things that you think he needs to do. Is it?
But it is projection, right? It's people that have climbed the ladder struggle to perceive the value or the preference of anybody else rejecting that as the thing to go for. Because I went up the ladder. Why would anybody not want to go up? That's what I want. Surely everybody wants that. And it is unfortunate because the structure that we have is one that essentially amplifies that, because those people are climbing the ladder, and then they're saying, if you don't climb the ladder, I'm successful, so success is me. If you don't climb the ladder, then you're not successful, out with you. That makes no sense.
Yeah, so
they're just projecting.
Yeah, but exactly. But when you're being very logical, like the example I gave you guys, that's sort of, I know that's the reason why I got taken into the principal's office again. Because I basically corner them into telling me what is missing. And so then they would go, well, who's going to talk in front of the executive staff meeting? Because I would expect a director to be able to do that. Okay, what kind of meeting would that be? What would that person need to do? Because to be honest, if you're a senior engineer or you're really senior, you are able to actually communicate to senior level people to explain to them, hey, things, they're already doing that. What's the problem, right? Or sometimes you are really doing that as it's not really to explain things. There's a lot of political play when you get to a certain level. And I have a different solution for them. I would say, well, would you be able to do this part of it and then call him in to do that part of it and then let him out and you do this part of it? Is it okay? Like you guys sort of tag team, right? So I also sort of decompose the responsibilities that the senior management think a certain management level needs to do, and then remap them to actually delegate upwards and say, hey, can you take some of that? And that person takes some of that. Now, when the senior management, and that particular example I gave you, it actually happened. When that senior management actually agrees, I actually grab that senior guy in and say, hey, guess what? So we got an agreement and you want to try this? Here's the list of responsibilities. You're already doing all that. Now we just require you from time to time, you'll be called into maybe the boardroom to explain all this, which, you know, is not really too much a stretch for you, right? It's okay. Now for the other stuff you don't like to do, like all the political stuff, you know, this senior management decided that they would actually be the shield for you. They would do all that for you. If that's the case, are you okay to now carry the title of a manager while you still have these? So I actually have, trust me, my organization, it's really weird. I have managers that is one way that actually just work with a team. I have managers that actually is like, you know, standing in front of board people. And I have managers like, because it really plays to their strengths and what they like to do. And now they can actually be quote unquote promoted and yet be able to do what they like to do and maybe expand a little bit, but not all the stuff that you don't like, and actually get the senior management to actually do some of the work, which my team actually laugh at me. Is like, because they have never heard of delegate up, but I like to delegate up. So I gave all those work to all the executives. So it's really the same principle, right? You are really teasing out what the responsibility really is, and then remapping them, and then get an agreement. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. As Cesar said, some of the management, no, I do all that. When I get promoted, I do all that. So why, you know, why can't you do that?
There's an interesting additional problem where the organization needs to manage how they're distributing information slightly differently, not based on title, but based on need. And that's another hurdle to climb.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
Like if you're not a director, you're not invited to this or that meeting,
yes.
or you can't be part of the strategy session, or you can't. So I've definitely had trouble getting the right people into the room because they didn't have the right title.
Yeah,
that is absolutely true. But then if you are, how should I say it? I'm going to quote you, Volker. If you are actually helping them solve their problems, then regardless of the title, they'll get you in. And I'm talking from personal experience. I was exposed to a lot of information in the company that my title is not entitled to and shouldn't be, because it's actually a lot of liability for the company if ever it's being, you know, how should I say it, investigated or, you know, audited, things like that. But when they find out that you actually help solve the problem, then they will get you the information that you need, because they want to see how you're going to solve the other problems. Because, you know, you can help them solve one, how about the other one? So it's the whole point is, again, it's you are now literally dissecting what are all the responsibilities. You are basically separating out the roles and the responsibilities, and just focusing on the responsibilities, and then maybe you can remap the roles with that to go with it, right? That's really the crux of it. Now, I am very happy that there are a lot of discussion and conversation and thoughts. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. And so we will have to do this really quickly. JF actually have, well, not just JF, we actually have 3 questions for you. And the last thing that you need to do before we take a group picture. So JF, will you run it?
Yes.
So
we would like to get feedback, and we want to get feedback through a constellation map. So the first thing I will do is I will share the screen, and you will see the question. And once I share the screen, you will see in your Zoom toolbar a tool called Annotate. When you click on Annotate, you will find one of the tools called Stamp. And Stamp will have different symbols. And what I'd like you to do is pick one symbol, and using that symbol, just map it on the top, on the horizon. How effective was this presentation? So if you, for example, I will put my heart in the middle, just to say, okay, I found it, some parts good, some parts bad. So if everyone can do that, we can see how effective.
So if you don't know where Annotate is, in the top you would say you're viewing JF screen, right? You have a green bar to say that. So right next to that it says View Option. If you click on View Option, and it's the second to the last, it's called Annotate. You guys see that? And if you click on Annotate, you would see that 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4 from the left is called Stamp. There's a little check mark there, Stamp. And you click on the stamp, and you have choices of heart, star, question mark, arrow, check mark, and X.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Are people done?
Is that it? Have you guys actually all?
No, sorry. Do we have to have edit access? Because I don't have view access. Does it make it?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
It's called a stamp. So the heart and the star is part of the stamp feature in Annotate.
Yeah, but I have view access. That's what I'm saying. Does it make? I don't think that's allowing.
Oh, no. So you're not actually in the slide. You need to go in the Zoom. It's actually in the Zoom.
Okay.
So in the Zoom, you will see that JF is actually sharing his sharing the slide. Yeah.
Yeah. And wherever you click on the shared screen, that's where the stamp will appear. You don't need the document.
No, hold on. She's not even there yet.
Okay.
So it is in the it's in the Zoom, and JF is sharing his the presentation. Do you see it?
Yeah, I see.
Okay. Then on the top of that, you would see that there's a green bar in the middle that says you're viewing JF screen. Yeah.
Okay.
On top of all the camera that you saw, right?
Okay. Okay, I see. And then I just put.
And you see view options on the right to that, the black view options, and you click down. The next to the last one is called Annotate. There you go.
There you
go.
go.
And then you choose Stamp after you choose Annotate, and you have a lot of choices.
Yeah, I got it. I did it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Sure.
Get everyone?
All right, so put it where you think it is. Are you guys all done? Give me indication. Thumbs up if you think you're done.
Great, thank you. Munwei, take a snapshot so we can paste it on the.
Okay.
All right.
Snapshot's done.
Snapshot's done, so I'm going to clear all the drawings. We'll go to the next question. How useful is the content? Again, it's on a continuum. Using the stamp tool again. Where in the continuum? From irrelevant, inapplicable to compelling, insightful. Okie dokes. Looks like we have everyone already in there. Awesome. Munwei?
Do we have everyone?
Yep. I see people putting the thumbs up earlier.
Okay.
Snapshot, please. All right.
Alrighty.
I will clear it again. And now for the last one. Did this talk meet your expectations? It's a bullseye. Please use the star or the check mark because all the other stamps don't bleed well when you put them into the background. They'll disappear. So use the star or the check mark to put where on the target we met your expectations, please. Cool. Good.
Are we all done?
Are we all done? Awesome. You're on mute again, Volker. I can see your mouth moving.
I just ran a test on the.
Oops, you're on mute again.
You're mute again. You mute again.
Okay, okay. I need to actually keep that
Yeah, you do.
pressed.
Yeah, you do.
I was
All
just
right.
running a test on one of those stars.
Okay. Are we good, folks? All right.
Okay. So the last thing we want to do is we're going back to the gallery view. JF?
Are you open for some more open-ended feedback?
Yes.
Yes, but can we take a group picture and then we'll do that? How about that?
All right.
Exactly. Okay, you guys ready? Smile.
Smile.
Camera, come on. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, so I know that we are out of time. For those of you who want to stay and give, I know Volker said an open-ended feedback. I would love to hear that.
Yes.
JF and I will stay a little while.
Yep, I'll stop the recording now.